Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, we'll explore some pioneering work from Black makers and thinkers who straddle the worlds of art and technology.
Plus, the election for the Detroit City Council is months away, but there's already legal drama with one prominent candidate.
Also, teacher retention in Michigan is worse than the national average. We'll look at what Detroit public schools are doing to change that.
But first, just across the Detroit River in Windsor and throughout Canada, voters are headed to the polls to cast their ballots in federal elections. Elections that political analysts are calling the most important in decades. Key issues at the ballot box include the economy, housing, tariffs, and how to deal with U.S. President Donald Trump. In this election, Canadians will select members of parliament and the political party that will run the government for the near future. 5 parties are vying for that power, including the Liberals, the Conservatives, and the New Democratic Party. Lydia Miljan is a political science professor at the University of Windsor. She spoke with WDET news director Jerome Vaughn about Canadian politics. They began by explaining which political parties are trying to win power this election.
We have a multi-party system currently, and so I think what will be familiar to Americans is that we have similar sort of split between left and right. So the equivalent to the Democrats would be the Liberal Party of Canada. Sort of equivalent to the Republicans would be the Conservative Party. But then messing things up, we have a much more left-of-center party, the New Democrat Party, which is which has never formed government. Only the Liberals and Conservatives have ever historically formed government in Canada at the federal level, but we have the NDP, who had over the last 4 years been propping up this current Liberal government because it was a minority situation. So they were pushing the government to the left, and they got a number of concessions such as dental care, pharmacare, and really supported their child care program. And then in addition to that, we have a single issue party, which is the Green Party. They have not been very successful federally, though they hold 2 seats currently. It looks like they might not be able to keep those this time around. And then we also have a regional party that only runs candidates in the province of Quebec. They're called the Bloc Québécois, and their purpose, at least how they describe it, is to ensure that the federal government always keeps Quebec interests in mind. And so because they only run candidates in Quebec, they can never form government because there's just not enough seats there. So that's our current system, but it looks like in this race, it is very much neck and neck between the Liberals and Conservatives, depending on the poll you see. They're both around 40% support, and that is at the expense of those minor parties, especially the NDP. They've really fallen down to almost single digits, and equally the Bloc Québécois lost a lot of support from the start of this campaign. It's picked up a little bit near the end.
So let me ask you a little bit about the major players right now. The Liberal leader is Mark Carney. He's just sort of burst on the scene recently after Justin Trudeau stepped down. What do we know about him, and what's he like?
So what people know about him is really his resume. He formerly was the governor of the Bank of Canada, and he was there during the Conservative government under Stephen Harper and was credited with helping the government withstand the pressures of the 2008 recession and sort of global meltdown. And then after that, he got a job with the central bank in the UK, and he was actually strongly arguing against Brexit. And so he was the governor of the Bank of England during a very difficult time for them.
He's been prime minister for just a very short period of time. What are folks saying about his leadership ability, leadership potential in the short period of time that he's been in office?
Yeah, so he's been really able to capture people's imagination. So his apart from him being a governor of 2 different central banks, he also was chairman of the board of Brookfield Financial Assets. He's also been very active on the global stage advocating for green economies, transition to green economies, and so he claims that he's really well equipped and he's best positioned to face Donald Trump. And clearly, there are a lot of Canadians who agree with him. So Canadians who, up until essentially January, were either not going to vote Liberal anymore or were going to switch their votes to the Conservatives, have now come back to the Liberal fold. And so they went from, being in the low teens in terms of popular support to now going neck and neck with the Conservatives. So, what's interesting about him, what I find most interesting about his candidacy is that while he's got this resume, he actually hasn't been able to point to anything that he's negotiated. So I think people just like the idea, maybe as an antidote to what we saw with Justin Trudeau, that he's the adult in the room, and so that they are thinking that he might be best positioned to deal with the Trump issue.
You talked about Mark Carney, his experience in the financial world. Somewhere in the back of my head, I had, dollar signs pop up. How much of that experience in the financial, economic world is important for him? How much is it making a difference for Mark Carney?
Oh, I think it's fundamental to his argument because, not only does he have that experience heading banks, heading big corporations, at least being on the board, he also has a PhD in economics, right? So he has the credibility issue. I mean, one of the biggest troubles that the Liberals had to face with Justin Trudeau, and the reason he only had one majority government, he had 3 elections and 2 of which he had minority governments, is that he just didn't seem qualified, right? He was a drama teacher. He was known for his equity, diversity, inclusion kind of things, and he famously said he didn't care much about inflation. He let the banks do that. So here you had somebody who was all style and no substance, and the Liberals now are saying, okay, we're done with the style and no substance. We just want substance and no style. So obviously that's really been what's catapulted Mark Carney to where he is in the public opinion polling.
So then there's Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. How can he make a difference? I know that change is a big part of his message. What can you tell me about the Conservative platform and his personality?
Yeah, so Poilievre, he over the last 2 years since he was elected leader of the Conservatives has really been able to prosecute the Liberals on their record, and he identified some major issues that the country had under the Liberal leadership. I mean, he pointed to the fact that they had reckless spending, which he argues rose up a cost of living, created huge inflationary pressures. He talked about how they mismanaged the immigration file to the point where it put a huge burden on our housing stock, meaning that also, like home ownership, became out of reach for a lot of people. And then his central part of his platform was to get rid of the consumer carbon tax, and that was part of his slogans, axe the tax. And so what's undermined him in a way is that Carney basically took the carbon tax off the table as soon as he became prime minister. He set the rate to 0. There has to be a legislative change to get rid of it permanently, but they promised to do that. And also, Poilievre has this or at least has this reputation for having a combative style, and that's sort of the nature of being the official opposition. But nonetheless, people were willing to vote for the Conservatives because they agreed with their diagnosis of the problem, but they weren't that comfortable with him particularly. And so that's really the difference between the two parties is the leadership issue and who people are gravitating towards. And that's the other part of this divide between the Conservatives and the Liberals, is the Liberals seem to be appealing to older Canadians, whereas the Conservatives, ironically, are appealing to millennials, Gen Zs, kids who are having difficulty getting jobs, who don't see a future path to home ownership. And so there's also a big generational and cultural divide.
Now, I know early on as the campaign started up, there were some comparisons between Poilievre and President Trump over here in the U.S. Has that made a difference? Has Poilievre tried to distance himself from Trump? How has that worked?
Yeah, Trump has been a huge factor in this election. So obviously the liberals are banking on the fact that they're saying they're very, that only Carney can fight Trump, but equally Poilievre is Trumpy, or he's too close to Trump. What we've seen is, Trump, in fact, made the statement that he liked Carney and he thought that he would probably be able to negotiate easier with the liberals. So obviously the conservatives say, see, we told you he doesn't like. In fact, Trump even said he wasn't a fan of Poilievre because Poilievre wasn't a MAGA guy. So it becomes part of the rhetoric of the campaign. I'm not sure that it sways voters, but certainly part of the rhetoric of the liberals is to accuse the conservatives of being Trump-like and that they're going to sell out. And equally, the conservatives are arguing that the liberals can't be trusted to negotiate in the best interest in Canada, that they're too weak to stand up to Trump. So Trump factor has been huge in this election. We've never really seen anything like this where American president becomes almost a ballot box issue. But when you look at public opinion polls, the support for the liberals improves anytime Trump comes into the race. And obviously the conservatives benefit when he's not a factor and when we can talk about the cost of living and other bread and butter issues.
Now, one of the things I've seen lately is that this antipathy with President Trump was a huge issue early on, but in the last few weeks, polls have shown that economic issues have really surfaced and are on the minds of Canadians right now, recession fears, where the country's economic health is going to go. What's your read about where the public is right now?
The public really is dependent on what's in the news cycle. So, yeah, it had been quiet for a while because it seemed that Trump was focused on other countries, but then he made some more comments about Canada, and, he became an issue again. I'm not sure how much that's going to impact the race anymore at this point. I think it's already discounted in. We had actually the ability to do advanced polling, and we did have the largest increase in advanced poll numbers ever, and that could be in part because it was over the Easter weekend, so people had the day off. But nonetheless, a lot of the people who were voting in those advanced polls would have been voting anyway, so their minds were already made up. Really, right now, what we're dealing with are the undecided for the people who are going to be voting on Election Day. And again, it really depends on the demographic of those individuals. Older Canadians much more concerned about tariffs and the threat of tariffs and Donald Trump, whereas younger Canadians, working-class Canadians, much more interested in the economic situation in terms of just cost of living and housing.
Given what President Trump has said, I just want to ask this. Are you hearing about any politicians or any voters that are saying they are interested in becoming the 51st state?
No, that is a non-starter. I mean, as much as everyone agrees that they dislike Trump in Canada, the other bizarre offshoot of this is that we've had this newfound patriotism. So as I always jokingly say, we should thank Trump for bringing us back our Canadian pride, because there are flags waving everywhere, regardless of your political stripe, and people are very strongly in favor of maintaining our sovereignty and just will not put up with any of that talk that we would even consider becoming the 51st state.
What should Detroiters look for as this election wraps up? Do you expect any major changes on the local level, dealing with the border or the interactions between Windsor and Detroit?
No, I don't think so. I mean, really, we've got to resolve the trading difficulties between the two countries. The renegotiation of the free trade agreements, I think is going to be more impactful. I mean, my position has always been that the tariffs harm Americans. That basically, if if a government wants to tax their own people, that's up to them to tax their own people. They will then have to live with the consequences of those decisions. So personally, I think the market's going to dictate what's going to happen, and we've seen that already. I mean, the stock markets are down, and Canadians are so enraged that they are changing their travel plans. There's going to be a huge economic impact on a lot of American states, including Michigan, because Canadians simply will not vacation there this summer. They will just stay away. They're not going to shop there. And, as much as Trump wants to say he doesn't need us and he doesn't want our goods, I'm sure he would like to have our travel dollars and, our shopping there. And if this continues, that will dry up because Canadians are essentially going to vote with their feet.
Lydia Miljan is a professor of political science at the University of Windsor. She spoke with WDET News Director Jerome Vaughn about today's federal elections in Canada. From the WDET newsroom, new state house bills would ban utility companies from donating to political candidates in Michigan. Supporters say utilities have too much influence over lawmakers. The companies say campaign contributions do not come from the rates customers pay. President Donald Trump comes to Metro Detroit tomorrow ahead of his 100th day in office. He's scheduled to visit Macomb County, which helped Trump win Michigan last year. Up next, we'll look at some pioneering work from Black makers and thinkers who straddle the worlds of art and technology. This is the Metro on WDET. Stay with us.